starting at the very beginning. We're in a universe that has a beginning. Did you know that? The universe is not infinitely old. The universe began to exist. And we know that not just from Scripture in Genesis 1. Forget about that. We're not going to use any Scripture to make our case tonight. We're just going to use the science that's available to us. Now, I can tell you in every crime scene, and by the way, if you spend 9 years in art school like I did before I became a cop, the only thing you really can do with that 9 years of art school is you can illustrate your own book, okay? So you're going to see that I'm using illustrations from the book, which I illustrated just for the sake of, because I could, basically. I once had a case at a crime scene where when I got there was a piece of foam rubber next to the body of the victim. It was from 1988, and for years, nobody could figure out what this foam rubber was. But I knew that this was the key to the entire case. Why? Because how the foam rubber gets in the room is critically important. Did it belong to the victim? Did she bring it in with her? Did it belong to the restaurant where the murder occurred? Had it been there all along? Did it start off in the room? Or did this come into the room when the suspect came in the room? If it's the last one, well, that's a piece of evidence I'm interested in. It turned out that, yes, the suspect was a guy who used to wear boots, but he would never untie his boots. And when he would take his boots on and off, he eventually wore out the cuff at the back of the boot. And on this night, as he was bending down to take the victim's money, the rubber foam from the cuff of the boot popped out. And he left it there. So now I have an origination of a piece of evidence. I now know what caused it. And finally, I did a search warrant at his house 30 years later. For his entire life, he's been wearing shoes like that and taking them off that way. And every shoe he owned had the same pattern of wear. So it was a powerful explanation for what caused the foam. So why a piece of evidence is in the room is important to me. How it begins to appear in the room is important to me. This idea of origination is critically important. And here we're going to look at something before we can even start talking about evidence in the room. We have to ask the question, how did the room get there? The room in this case is the universe. It turns out there is very good physical evidence that demonstrates we are in a universe that has a beginning. I have an entire chapter on this, and because I love you guys, I'm not going to talk about it tonight. I'm just going to show you the kinds of scientific, philosophical evidence in very different categories that all point to the same conclusion. And that conclusion is that we are in a universe that came into being from nothing. That's not my position as a theist. That is the position of physicists who are doing this work, and that's why the standard cosmological model in physics is called the Big Bang cosmological model. Now, why it's called that, I don't want you to get hung up on Big Bang. Sometimes as Christians we do. Big Bang does not dictate a certain age of the universe, and Big Bang does not also dictate that evolution is true. You can reject evolution, even theistic evolution, and you can reject a given age of the universe, yet still hold to Big Bang cosmology. Because the one thing that Big Bang cosmology teaches from a science perspective is that everything came into existence from nothing. That's huge. And the most skeptical atheists already recognize this. Alexander Vilenkin, who's at Tufts University, is a Russian cosmologist, says it this way: with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. And even Stephen Hawking writes it this way. Hawking and Penrose together wrote several volumes. Here he says, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Wow, think about that for a second. Big Bang cosmology, the standard cosmological argument, or standard cosmological model, argues that everything began from nothing. And when I say everything, I mean all space, time, and matter. Wait a minute, space? Space is not something, space is nothing. No, space is something. Time is something, and of course, matter is something. Well, if space is something and it's not nothing, what is nothing? Aristotle put it this way: nothing is what rocks dream about. That's what nothing is. Space is something. And I'm not uncomfortable with Big Bang cosmology. Why? Because we know that big bangs require big bangers. Right? And the question, of course, is what is this big banger? Well, I can tell you one thing. It bangs all space, time, and matter into existence, according to the science. And if that's the case, the thing that bangs all space, time, and matter into existence cannot itself be space, time, or matter, because the beginning of that stuff is the beginning of our universe. So whatever this big banger is, it has to be a non-spatial, non-material, atemporal banger. What could that be? Now, atheists, in my book, I spend a lot of time talking about the alternatives. I'm not just going to give you the explanation from outside the room. I want to show you every explanation from those folks who want to describe it from inside the room. And I'll show you why they don't work. But tonight, because I love you guys, I'm not going to kill you with that. But I want to show you one thing for sure. If you work criminal trials, you recognize something. When defense attorneys argue against you, and you have the truth. I've even had cases where after they argued against us for 8 weeks, we convicted the guy, and at sentencing, he confessed to the entire crime. So clearly, the entire time, the defense attorney was arguing against the truth. And when they're doing that, they're doing it usually in one of three ways. One, they're going to argue something that's not supported by the evidence. Or two, they're going to redefine the terminology to make it easier to let them go. Or three, they're going to make some kind of logical flaw. It turns out the same thing happens with explanations from inside the room against the kind of evidence I'm showing you. So for example, this is from the book. Some people will say, well, maybe we're wrong about the nature of time. If we redefine what we mean by time, we can avoid the beginning of time. Okay, that's one possible approach. Some people will say, well, couldn't the universe be expanding, but not from nothing? Maybe it's expanding and contracting cyclically, and we just happen to be in an expansion period right now, which makes it look like the universe came from nothing. But it could be contracted and then expanding again. The problem, of course, is that the science does not help their case because there's not enough mass and gravitational forces to cause the actual. As a matter of fact, the universe is not slowing down in its expansion so it can recollapse. It's actually speeding up in its expansion. Or maybe we've got an issue, but maybe there's a larger eternal environment. By the way, everyone, atheists and theists alike, are looking for the first eternal cause of the universe. Have you ever had someone say to you, well, if you believe in God, who created God? Well, no. The definition of God, from our perspective, is the uncreated creator of everything. So when you're asking who created the uncreated creator, that's a silly question. And by the way, you atheists also believe there's an uncreated creator. Some of you believe it's a quantum environment from which universes emerge. Some of you believe there's some kind of multiverse generator that creates an infinite number of universes. But regardless, whatever you say it is, you believe it's eternal. So here's the problem with these kinds of solutions. They keep you in the room, for sure, but they have evidential problems. So for example, if you try to redefine time like Hawking has done, he'll even admit if you go back to the way time really is, his theory falls apart. And not only that, if you're talking about a cyclical universe, this is not supported by evidence. But there is a theory out there that seems very provocative to some people, and it's called multiverse theory. There's an environment out there that's producing an infinite number of universes. Ours is just but one. But the thing that's creating this universe is something, guess what? It's something external to our universe. So this theory about multiverse theory right away concedes that you have to have an outside source that's creating the universe. The problem with this theory is that it's logically inconsistent for a number of reasons. I'll just give you the clearest one. What is the multiverse generator? What is this environment like that the multiverse generator is in? Think about this. This is what Lawrence Krauss says about this. He's a physicist at Arizona State University. He wrote a book called Universe from Nothing. He was on Stephen Colbert's show, the old show, okay? And he was interviewed, and this is what he said about this environment with this multiverse generator. He says, physics has changed what we mean by nothing. Empty space is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles popping in and out of existence. And if you wait long enough, that kind of nothing will always produce particles. Those particles could then grow into universes. What if there's like a big pot of boiling water that bubbles are emerging in? Each one's a universe. It emerges without a cause and becomes a universe, and there's an infinite number of these. Really? Well, what's the pot of water like? Remember, it can't be space, time, or matter because that stuff begins at the beginning of our universe. But he says that environment is, wait a minute, he says it's empty space. Well, no, Stephen, or Lawrence, it can't be space. Your space is going to be created as a result. You can't start with space to get space. Then he says, well, there's virtual particles. So you have some form of energy in the, wait a minute, no, Lawrence. You can't start with space and matter. We're trying to describe how space and matter got here. Then he says, well, if you wait long, oh, great, so now you've got time too. So what he's basically saying is, if you start with space, time, and matter, you can get space, time, and matter. Well, no duh. That doesn't help us. It's logically inconsistent. And you see this a lot in this kind of thinking. But of course, if there is something out there that's all-powerful, non-spatial, atemporal, non-material, that could begin this, that would explain all of it.